Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us for today's webinar, The Road Ahead, the Arizona Outlook for Affordable Housing Financing Options. My name is Serena Unrein, and I'm with the Arizona Partnership for Healthy Communities, which is managed by LISC Phoenix. We will be getting started in just a moment as we have some folks joining the webinar right now. We're looking forward to a great conversation this morning. Just a few things to note before we get started. You can see us, but we cannot see you. But you are an important part of our conversation this morning. So please go ahead and let us know who you are and tell us in the chat where you're from and any questions that you might have for our panelists today. But having you introduce yourself in the chat will give us a sense of who all is in the audience today. So let's go ahead and get started. Thank you again for taking the time to join our webinar this morning, The Road Ahead, the Arizona Outlook for Affordable Housing Financing Options. Again, my name is Serena Unrein, and I'm with the Arizona Partnership for Healthy Communities, which is managed by LISC Phoenix. Once a quarter, we bring together practitioners from various sectors to have conversations around the social determinants of health, to share best practices, data, and policy updates to help improve community health. This morning's webinar will focus on the shifting policy landscapes around affordable housing financing. We will discuss new opportunities and changes to how affordable housing is financed in Arizona. We have some great speakers this morning. We will hear from the development community, a senior banking executive, and a representative from the Arizona Department of Housing. And we'll also have a federal policy update. A few things to note as we're getting started. Again, you can see us, but we can't see you. You are an important part of the conversation, even though you're not appearing on screen today. So please let us know who you are and where you're from in the chat. Please be sharing your thoughts and ideas in the chat, as well as any questions you have for our panelists. We'll have a short presentation and then we'll get into a conversation. So if you have any questions as the presentation goes along, please go ahead and share those in the chat, and we will be sure to circle back to those at a later point in this webinar this morning. And since everyone always asks, yes, we will be recording this webinar. We will send out a link to the webinar to everyone who has registered this morning. So please be sure to share that with any of your friends and colleagues who also might be interested. We'll go ahead and I'll introduce each of our panelists shortly here, and then we'll have a quick presentation. Or maybe not so quick. I don't want to rush you, Matt, but we have Matt Josephs from LISC National, Paul Bunyard from PNC Bank, Bill Knowlton from B3 Development, and Keon Montgomery from the Arizona Department of Housing. I'll go ahead and turn this over to Matt so he can share a federal update.
Great. Let me give me a minute and I will try to screen share. And let me get it to presentation mode. Sorry, should have keyed up for the beginning. Okay, so thanks very much, Serena, and everybody. And Terry, thank you for inviting me, my partner in Phoenix. So I'm Matt Josephs. I'm the Senior Vice President of Policy for LISC. I know because Terry's done such a great job in the Arizona markets that I think you all are pretty familiar with LISC, but we're a national nonprofit housing development organization. We have local markets in 35 other local offices in 35 other markets outside of Phoenix. And we also have a national rural program. So we really try to, in some respects, touch the entire country. We invest in affordable housing, community revitalization, economic development. So I'm very pleased I could join you all today. And I head up the government affairs and public policy team for this. I'm here in DC helping to make sure that the resources that we all rely upon in our work are available and that the programs are operating well. So today what we want to talk about, I want to do a little bit of a landscape about where I think we might be in the affordable housing space. And I can't wait to hear from the practitioners. I'll do some table setting there. And then, yeah, let's talk about what's happening, whether it's on the Hill with the budget and appropriations or tax, authorizing legislation. And then we could talk about some of the latest from the executive branch. So starting with the landscape, probably no surprise to any of you all, home prices have continued to grow dramatically over the past decade and a half. With the home price index starting at the basis of 100, you can see that it's grown over 20% during that period. So home prices are continuing to grow. And I should credit, this is all from the Joint Department that does their annual State of the Housing Report. And it was just released last month, so perfect timing. And I took their slides to aid with this presentation. So it's not just that the home prices are rising, right? The home buying costs are going up primarily because of rising interest rates. So you have both home prices rising at a time when interest rates, mortgage payments, monthly costs are going up as well. So not surprisingly, if you look in that last column, that last row, the required annual income has grown significantly just over the last 4 or 5 years. That's needed to buy a so priced out of the market. And this is why you'll see what's typically around 4 times the median family income is typically the guideline for what you would need to purchase a home. You don't want a price that's above about 4 times your median family income, and now that's going up to over 5 times over the last couple of years. And a part of the problem too is that there's fewer inventories. More homes are starting to finally be produced, but nowhere near where we were before the housing crisis in 2008. So production is definitely not meeting the demand, and as families are growing, it's not meeting the need for families. So this is the single family side. On the multifamily side, we also have this issue where there's the pace of housing development is not keeping up with the growing families. We've been under production. The production is now starting to ramp up significantly, but still not in a way that's going to be able to meet the needs of the growing families. As a result, renters are getting squeezed. The cost burdens, which are when you're paying more than 30% of your income in rent, that's a cost burden. And it's a cost burden if you're paying over 50% of your income in rent. And so here's some of the statistics. And now it has always been an issue, obviously, for lower income families, but now even middle income families are increasingly feeling this kind of pinch and are increasingly burdened by their rent payments. And not surprisingly, what you'll see is that when you have higher family incomes that are having to support your rent, that leaves less available to support other important needs. So families are now having to make very tough decisions, financial decisions. Homelessness continues to rise, hit another high. So again, the lowest ends of the markets are really feeling the squeeze more than anyone. In Arizona, you're not immune from this issue. Again, the folks on this call know a lot better than I do what you're feeling on the local levels. But it's an interesting statistic. Thank you. The National Loan Coalition puts out a gap study every year that looks at what is the gap between the available housing and what's affordable to lower income families. You would have in Arizona, you'd have to basically work 2 full-time 40-hour-a-week jobs at minimum wage to afford an apartment. So it's difficult for working families to really afford an apartment at a reasonable rent. All right, so that's a little bit of a landscape. I know we're going to get into some more of that later, but let me share with you kind of what the latest is on the Hill. So the thing to focus on right now, they actually should be focused on this week, but yet they're in recess, is trying to pass a budget for FY 2026. That is the fiscal year that begins on October 1st, 2025. So that's the FY 26 fiscal year. They're supposed to have all these budgets, all these appropriations bills, and there's a dozen of them, but have to be passed in order to keep the agencies funded beginning October 1. So a failure to pass an appropriations bill will lead to a government shutdown. And we are literally now a week away from that occurrence, a little over a week away. That if there's not what's known as a continuing resolution, which is will basically fund agencies at last year's level, buy in a little more time. If we don't see a continuing resolution, we are facing a government shutdown as of October 1st. The president submitted his request. He's proposed significant cuts to a lot of the domestic discretionary spending programs, particularly in the housing space. The fact that there is such a slim majority in the House, and that to pass budget bills, appropriations bills, you still need 60 votes in the Senate, means that they are going to have to at some point negotiate with Democrats and kind of figure out a path forward. So the House has been marking up some bills on the floor. The Senate has been marking up the bills in committee, but they have not yet been brought the bills for floor votes yet. So that's kind of where we stand. And you can see a lot of bills have been kind of winding their way through the agency, the Congress. The big bill for us is transportation and HUD that funds all the HUD programs. That has not yet been voted off the floor in the House or the Senate, but it has been marked up in the committees. So here kind of we stand. You'll see with the president's budget that he zeroed out a lot of critical programs. And the Senate has mostly restored some of these programs to last year's levels. And the House has also put money into these programs, with the exception of home, which is a huge exception. The House had kind of restored money to a lot of these programs, so they weren't really buying the president's requests. But again, we don't know what these bills are going to look like until they get voted on and then what they call conference. So the House and Senate have to talk to each other and try to get the same numbers in a single bill that can pass or be part of a big package of bills that pass. So that's the next step. But the ones we're most concerned about definitely is the home program is taking a big hit. The administration proposed block granting a lot of the other Section 8 assistance. The House and the Senate said no, that's not the right solution. Is a certified CDFI. I saw a couple of my CDFI friends out there on this call too. So the administration had proposed basically eliminating the CDFI program, replacing it with a much smaller initiative with a primary focus on rural communities. But again, the Hill wasn't having that, so we'll see where the funding ends up. But I think the CDFI program will survive through this budget process. And I wanted to also share, just I know a lot of you are working in the rural communities, and the USDA has its own slew of housing programs. So I just wanted to share the data as well. And it's kind of a similar scenario where Trump administration would dramatically cut or zero out programs. Houses would restore them, but not as high a levels as the Senate is inclined to do. So we're going to keep an eye on these USDA bills. All right. That's kind of on the funding side. On the tax side, Congress did pass a massive tax bill, the big beautiful bill, as it's being called by those that enacted it. It was a Republican-only bill. They were able to use what's a process called reconciliation, where they did not need to get 60 votes in the Senate. They only needed 50, so they passed the entire thing very, very narrowly with Republican votes, only by one vote in the House, if I'm not mistaken. So what this bill did, it made a lot of the tax cuts from President Trump's 2017 bill permanent. It introduced some new tax provisions, including no tax on tips, and they solved for the states. They increased the limits for state and local tax deductions. To help pay for this, they cut literally what's going to end up being hundreds of billions of dollars from Medicaid and SNAP programs. They phased out or eliminated renewable energy tax credits. So that created some revenues that they could help offset the cost of the bill. But they also spent a lot more on border security, immigration enforcement, defense. So all told, it's going to cost several $1 trillion, this legislation. And they had to also increase the debt ceiling in order to allow Congress to continue to spend money. So that was what the big components of the bill were. But there were some real wins for affordable housing, especially with respect to the low-income housing tax credit. The legislation expanded the formula for the 9% credits. So those are the ones that are allocated to the states by a formula, and they increased the formula by 12%. So Arizona and every other states could have 12% more credits to share for their projects. So that's going to result hopefully in some more housing develop, but certainly I know there's a lot of gaps that need to be filled, and so it can also help cover gaps at current properties. The bond financing threshold was another huge win. There's in order to claim 4% tax credits, you have to make sure that project historically you had to make sure projects are financed at least 50% of the way with private activity bonds. Well, a lot of states, and I don't know whether Arizona was in this camp, but a lot of states were bumping up against that their cap for the private activity bonds. So they lowered the formula threshold to 25%. So now there's more bond authority available to do more housing, and you can still claim the 4% credits. Serena, do you want to pause for questions? I see Bill's got a hand raised.
Sure. Let's go ahead and have Bill hop in here.
Matt, thank you. Don't mean to interrupt. I am an affordable housing developer and a recovering real estate attorney who went to ASU Law and practiced law in Scottsdale for a number of years. I see that David Castillo in the audience has asked if home and CBDG funds are eliminated or substantially reduced, do tax credit projects still pencil? And I'd like the rest of the panel to opine on that.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Keon Montgomery with the Arizona Department of Housing. So I would say, yes, tax credit deals will still pencil. Not every deal will pencil, and in some areas it may be more challenging. What we see in the data over the last 5 years is that roughly 40 to 45% of the tax credit deals have utilized some form of gap financing, whether it's home dollars, National Housing Trust funds, or even state housing trust funds. But it's not necessarily a deal killer. It may hurt specific deals that are really tight in their margins, but we have seen deals continuing to move through without those specific gap sources.
I just add from the lender's perspective, every tech deal that we look at does have a gap. So it still has to come from somewhere, whether it's from home, CDBG, or in this case, if those were eliminated, there'll have to be other sources of funding that can help fill that gap. So there is still a need substantially.
And so, Keon, was my point a little correct that there was some flexibility that if you needed to, you might end up just assigning more credits to a project to fill a gap? Now, does that work as a potential solution? Obviously, the downside is that you're doing less units total, but could that also end up being another gap fill if home dollars are really hard to come by?
That could be the case. One of the challenges is that we're seeing is that as Paul mentioned, there is a gap, and a gap has to be filled in some way. So whether it's home, whether it's CDBG, whether it's National Housing Trust funds, state housing trust funds, or the state tax credit, those are all various options that could be used. Some of those options, state tax credit has now expired, and so that option's off the table. If home and CDBG are off the table, that does make it more challenging on developers. To the point that Matthew's making, yes, one solution could be to increase the maximum amount of credits per project. The downside to that is, as you said, we would fund less deals. So we have seen the trend, I would say, going back maybe 7, 8 years, that tax credit projects have increasingly started to request the max that we had in terms of the cap. So we're seeing a lot more deals come in requesting 2.5 million in annual credits. Whereas in the past, we may have seen deals able to pencil where they're only requesting closer to 2 million in credits. And so the result is we're basically getting projects that are about the same size, but it takes more money to build the same amount of units, where we ultimately award fewer projects, but the units per project are roughly the same.
From a practitioner standpoint, I've built about 1,000 affordable housing units, both on the 9% and the 4% program. The reality is the following. It costs more to build affordable housing units today than it did 10 years ago. Interest rates are high, construction commodity prices are high, land is high. And so ultimately what this translates to is fewer affordable housing units coming to market. And that's just the reality. And that's in the metro areas. That's in Phoenix, Tucson, I'll call Flagstaff a metro area, but if you go to rural Arizona or rural Utah or rural Nevada, it actually costs more money to build because getting qualified general contractors and subcontractors who have the appropriate bonding capacity, it's more expensive to build. And so, from my limited perspective, I just completed a 20 rural project in central Utah. The rural communities are the ones who are going to feel the real brunt of this. Um, Others may disagree, but that's been my experience thus far.
All right, I'll go back to the presentation. Thank you though for, yeah, and Bill or the other panelists, if you're seeing any chats that are relevant, I'm happy to pause and take some questions along the way. So LIHTC, like I said, some good news for LIHTC out of that big tax bill. Good news for new market tax credits. I know those aren't often used for housing. Sometimes it is as part of mixed use properties or as for single family homes. That program had been set to expire in 2025. It's now been made permanent. So that's a huge win. It took 25 years. That program was enacted at the very end of 2000, but now that's a permanent part of the tax code. So that's exciting news. Opportunity zones. I think there's kind of mixed feelings, some mixed results around opportunity zones, but it's a good, at least economic development tool. And it's been made permanent as well. So I think a lot of people are going to focus their attention. I know we're going to have questions later about that. But it is permanent now. They did tighten the definition of those zones to hopefully keep the focus more on the communities that need it the most. They created a new category for rural opportunity funds. So they kind of gave a little incentives to invest in these funds. They finally have really detailed, robust reporting requirements that had been lacking, but now are required by law. So that's, I think, good. It was disappointing on the affordable housing side. The estimates are that that'll first off, multifamily housing is probably the biggest single investment space in opportunity zones. It's not in businesses, it's not in commercial facilities, it's in multifamily housing. But only about 3% of that is long-term rent restricted affordable housing. So only a very small piece of that is affordable housing. And that was disappointing. I wish they had done something to address that in the opportunity zones. And the last one I want to talk about and actually spend a slide on is something called the neighborhood homes investment. So this is something LISC and a lot of partners, about 36 organizations, national organizations, trade associations, part of the Neighborhood Homes Coalition, that want to create a tax credit to support single family home ownership in struggling communities. These are communities where the cost to develop, rehab a home is more than the value of the home. So you have this kind of affordability gap. And as Bill was pointing out, I know he was talking about multifamily, but you have the same problem with single family homes where it's just too costly to build homes in rural communities, especially at the price points that are going to be affordable to the families that live there. So this would create a tax credit to fill that gap. And it'd be administered by the state agencies. So Keon's team would administer the program like they do LIHTC. The credit could cover up to 40% of the total development costs, but only up to the actual gap. So it's a very efficient initiative. And it does have a predominant focus on kind of distressed, struggling communities. So we were disappointed we couldn't get it in the House or Senate bill, but there's going to be other opportunities. There might be a tax bill later this year. There could be bipartisan housing legislation, which actually I'll talk about on the next slide, that maybe presents an opportunity to add this as an amendment to that legislation. So the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act. Keep your eyes on that. So Congress is moving. They're definitely, I go in and talk to offices and they say, yes, one of the top things I'm hearing about from my constituents is the lack of affordable housing. So the Senate Banking Committee, which oversees HUD, among other agencies, and Treasury Department, they passed a big bipartisan bill, 24-0. It came out, every single member of the committee voted for it. There are provisions in there that would make it easier to finance housing in rural areas with USDA programs. It would authorize and improve the home program. It would create a new program at HUD to finance single-family home repairs. It would make the rental assistance demonstration program permanent. It would lift the cap on RAD units, so there could be a lot more redevelopment of the aging public housing It creates statutory authorities for disaster recovery under CDBG that will make that program more efficient and effective. The Community Investment and Prosperity Act would allow more LIHTC investments by banks that are bumping up against their caps. There's investment caps for banks. And a lot of the big banks are at these caps, and they'd love to do more investments in LIHTC and new markets and other things, but they can't. So there's a lot of great legislation here. The House has not yet marked up legislation, but they might later this fall. So I think that's something to really watch. And there's a lot of deregulatory items here as well. So Bill, do you want to have a question here?
Yes. So my friend Pat McNamara just posed the question. He said, you will see nearly no deals in the supportive housing category. There are more credits, but the value of those credits has plunged, so possibly more workforce deals. I wanted to comment on that and then ask my fellow panelists to chime in as well. As it relates to permanent supportive housing, it's critically needed all across the country, specifically in the West. Those are the hardest deals to do from a LIHTC development standpoint. I also want to point out that one of the largest permanent supportive housing developers, the Sacramento Self-Help Housing, they housed about 700 people in California. They went bankrupt in 2023, and there's another large permanent supportive housing developer who is on the verge of filing for bankruptcy protection. And so Pat's comment is spot on. And while it is good that they are increasing the scope and size of the 9% credits, when you flood the market with more credits, the price will go down. And so, and from my conversations with various tax credit syndicators, no one is quite sure how that's going to play out. And so when I've got deals right now that I'm looking at and I go out for bids and something that would have priced 92, 93 cents a year ago, today is maybe 84, 85 cents. Each penny of decreased valuation equates to a loss of $100,000 of equity for the project. So it's substantial.
Yeah, there's two. I glossed over one quickly, but I'll reiterate it right now. So this legislation right now, the banks are limited, I think in the OCC's case, to 15% of their equity that they could put into this tier one equity, that they can put in these kind of approved community development investments. And so this would give regulators the ability on a case basis to allow up to 20%. So I've heard from some very big LIHTC players that are pushing for this legislation and say we can invest more. We want to invest more. So hopefully this is part of this package. So hopefully if this goes through the package, or even individually, if we can pull that one out, that will help soften some of this demand problems we're talking about. And the other one is this happened about a month ago. FHFA gave more authority to Fannie and Freddie, $1 billion each more, so they can double their investments in housing credit properties. And actually, they're I think 40% of it has to focus on these hard to reach, or maybe 50%, these hard to reach communities, including rural communities and preservation deals. So that should again help with the demand in some of these markets. But yeah, it's absolutely, that's the risk you run when you get more credits out there. You know, the market's going to have to adjust a little, but we'd love to just welcome new investors into the market. So we're always looking for ways to do that. So those are all good points. You know what I thought, Bill, you were going to share on the supportive housing is there's also litigation. I don't know if you guys are aware of this. I'm just kind of getting up to speed on it, but I gather that the administration had tried to say that certain communities cannot access their continuum of care funding because they haven't abided by other Trump administration priorities around clearing out homeless encampments and other integration things that are completely unrelated. And I know they just got a victory in an injunction, I think in the Rhode Island courts. So we have to watch that litigation too, because this is obviously such a huge source of funding for the permanent supportive housing projects. So now there's a real concern about the continuum of care funds. And maybe you can pick up on that too when we talk about the local landscapes. Okay, and I'm almost done with these slides, I promise, but we did want to turn attention to the executive branch. Well, I just mentioned one of the things we have to keep an eye on continuum of care, and that was actually all come up almost since I developed these slides. The three things that we're watching the most are federal workforce reductions. This is the kind of things that's happening under the tip of the iceberg. that they have been making, and you heard a lot about getting administration, what's Doge doing. You don't hear as much about it in the news, but frankly, a lot of people took these voluntary buyouts, and they had been, basically on a getting paid a paid leave, and now they're officially going to be off the books in September. And I've heard estimates that about a quarter of the HUD workforce has taken these buyouts. So this is in addition to anything the administration is doing to try to eliminate jobs. They're not backfilling jobs, and a lot of people are taking these buyouts. So when you rely on HUD for certain assertions, for certain clearances, reviews, approvals, I imagine the work it's going to slow down considerably. And so many of their programs are. It's not just their direct funded programs, but also the HUD insurance and things like that. So I definitely expect work will slow down considerably. There's funding freezes, right? We are focusing on FY26. What is the president asking for in the budget? But what about money that's already been appropriated that they're not awarding? That is a huge problem. That's hit the CDFI sector pretty hard, and it's because they haven't released money that has already been appropriated for awards. So there's a lot of us CDFIs that are sitting with applications pending, wondering when they're going to make their awards. So there's things like that are going on. And then, of course, this overriding attack on diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI, climate resiliency impacts a lot of the work we're doing locally, and a lot of you all are doing locally too. Even if not, directly doing that, they're just getting swept up in this kind of broad brush. So that's something we've been really keeping our eyes peeled on. So again, when you looked at the executive orders, they were trying to freeze a lot of the grant making activities. That was kind of put on hold by the courts, but they're doing these reviews around DEI, environmental justice. Are you involved in that? That's slowing down a lot of the review processes. They are theoretically looking for DEI practitioners and prevent them from receiving federal funding. You have these executive orders around reducing the federal workforce that we mentioned. There was most recently, August 7th, there was a executive order around federal grant making that would greatly politicize the process. So political appointees will now have to be directly involved in the award making, and that can't do anything except slow things down considerably, even if they don't change any of the decisions of the underlying agency staff. To think that one single person might have to be responsible now for certifications on hundreds of grant applications or something. I just can't see how this isn't going to just become a complete slowdown of grinding to a halt a lot of the work the agencies are doing. So these are all things that are, kind of existentially impacting federal funding awards, even when the money is made available by Congress. Some of the additional things to watch are these rescissions. This is, to me, the largest area of concern is when Congress gives money for programs, instructs the agencies to do their awards and make the money available, and the agency just says, we're not going to do it. That's a violation of what's known as the Impoundment Act, but this administration is ready to challenge that act. It was already upheld by the Supreme Court in 1972, I think, 73, but they want to challenge it. And at some point, I'm sure the court will have to hear this again. But in the meantime, it's putting all this funding that's been awarded by Congress at risk. Community Reinvestment Act, for all the federal funding we talk about, one of the most important federal initiatives for getting funding into distressed communities has been the Community Reinvestment Act. There was a lot of attempts to change the rules that really haven't been updated since 1995. So over the last 5, 6, 7 years, there's been a lot of fits and starts with the agencies putting out rules, proposed rules, pulling them back, and then they put out final rules that were supposed to take effect back in April of 2024, but there was litigation, so there was an injunction. Those rules never took effect, and the administration has decided to pull those rules. And at least for now, basically all the banks are on 1995 rules, which is fine. It's not as ideal as having some fresh rules out there, but we've all been living with these rules for a while, so we kind of all know what's out there and what to expect. What is of concern is if someone tries to really take another shot at the rules and really try to minimize CRA. I think that would be catastrophic. So that's a space to watch. And lastly, GSE reform. The GSEs have been part of essentially under federal ownership since 2009, 2008, maybe even. So they are trying to figure out ways to unwind the GSEs. So that's going to be a space to watch in the housing world. So with that, I'm going to stop my share and turn it back to you, Serena.
Thank you so much for that informative update. And I want to immediately turn this over to our other panelists and get their reactions, as well as give them an opportunity to introduce themselves, since we've heard a little bit from them already, but haven't really gotten to know who they are and why they're here on this panel. So I will go ahead and, Bill, if you don't mind, since you're the first person that I see on screen, I'll go ahead and start with you and get your perspective as a developer and what's top of mind for you after hearing this update on the shifting landscape of affordable housing financing.
Thank you, Serena, and I want to thank Matt for that. That was like a PhD level download in 20 minutes. That was amazing. Thank you so much. My name is Bill Knowlton. I am a real estate attorney turned affordable housing developer. I've been practicing law for about 17 years and been developing LIHTC affordable housing full time since 2015. Like I said, my family's been in the business for 4 generations. Here in Utah, I've lived in Arizona for 8 years. 2 of my children were born in Arizona. And real estate development on its own is a lot of work, and it's a very, very challenging landscape. When you layer in a government program, both federal, state, and local municipalities with their rules, regulations, and bureaucracy, it takes a tremendous amount of patience, a tremendous amount of looking long term. Some of these deals take 3 years to come to fruition, and during that time, you may or may not be getting paid. And so you have to have a strong stomach for the volatility that gets exerted by politicians who don't necessarily care or understand the impact of some of these cuts for the boots on the ground. I see a question in the chat about from Larry Dumka. I hope I said that right, about what's the impact of the expiration of the Arizona LIHTC. To give you a contrast, Larry, the state of Utah quadrupled its size of the state housing LIHTC credits 2 years ago. They have been fully subscribed every year, and they will sunset in 2027. The increase in the state LIHTC here in Utah has created hundreds and hundreds more units. When that goes away in Utah, there will be hundreds and hundreds of less units that get created. I anticipate the same ramifications will happen in Arizona, and perhaps Keon could opine on that. I will say this: I'm a very visual learner, and I was taking notes over the last year. About 10 to 15% of my day was explaining to municipal leaders, land sellers, construction workers, banks about how LIHTC works. And so I started creating a white paper. Well, the white paper started out as 5 pages, turned into 10 pages, turned into 30 pages. So I wrote a book. There are 2 books on LIHTC available on Amazon. One is written by a CPA, one is written by an attorney. So pick your poison. If anyone on this chat would like one and cost is a problem, please message me directly. I'm happy to send one to you for free. But with that, I'm happy to answer questions after introductions are over.
Thanks so much, Bill. I'll be sure to put a link to your book in the chat in just a moment. Keon, why don't I go ahead and turn it over to you?
Thank you. So I'm Keon Montgomery, one of the assistant deputy directors at the Arizona Department of Housing. I oversee our housing and community development programs teams, which means that I'm overseeing the group that does all of our LIHTC financing as well as our gap financing. And as I would say, my reaction based on the presentation is that we're really in a wait and see mode. We're hearing a lot of rumblings of potential changes. The impact of those changes, especially when we're talking about reductions in funding and gap sources, it doesn't sound great. We're celebrating the win of getting more tax credits allocated, but that's going to then impact pricing. So I really feel like we're in a wait and see mode to see what the next equilibrium is going to be. Whenever there's shifts in the market, it takes a little bit of time for developers to adjust and figure out how best to structure their deals and projects. I think I've been in this industry for about 20 years now. I started off developing 9% deals with nonprofit groups in California. And the one thing I would say I've seen is the financing models continue to shift and change. I think the bright spot is that there's a lot of players that are involved in these deals that are interested in seeing deals move forward. So as we see changes in the market, it takes a little bit of time to catch up and figure out how to finance and continue to move deals. But there is a willingness to get deals done. And I think we're at a point now where we're going to have to see what's that new wrinkle, that new shift that's going to help get deals done.
Thank you, Keon. Really grateful to have the perspective from the Arizona Department of Housing here today. Paul, what is your reaction to everything that's been shared so far this morning?
Yeah, good afternoon. Nice to meet everybody. So I am Paul Bunyard. I work with PNC Bank, oversee our community development banking group for what we call the Mountain States, Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico. We have a team that does direct lending and investing into different projects, including affordable housing as well as CDFIs and so forth. My background, I work with the city and county of Denver doing soft funds. So I've had about 15 years experience working in affordable housing. And I look forward to the discussion coming up in the panel. It was a great presentation. And I think my takeaway was we're in the eye of a perfect storm right now that you're seeing happen with the high costs coming in, as Bill said, from the land, from the trades, from the material, from the insurance costs, from the carry cost, from the financing costs. Every aspect of it is elevated. And it's at a time when post-COVID, the banks pulled back due to real estate concentrations on their balance sheets that are not tied directly to affordable housing, such as office space. But when you have a lot of office loans on your books that you can't move off, it takes up the other areas. And then with that as well, the soft funds drying up, interest rates climbing, and the need for housing just getting exact.
Figured it out.
Karina, you back with us?
I'm sorry about that. My Zoom just automatically or just shut down. So I'm just thrilled to be back. So I'm sorry that I missed the end of what Paul was saying there. But
I'm not speaking for everyone, but everyone gulped and was nervous there for a second because we lost our leader.
Panic is the word.
you all would have been fine without me. So it would have been a fun experiment. But luckily, hopefully, I'm knocking on wood, we won't have to, continue with that experiment. I wanted to get back. Go ahead, Bill. You raised your hand. So
One comment for everyone that's participating today, and this is directly related to affordable housing, but it's also related to what's going on in the United States of America. When you do a deal, and Paul and Keon and Matt, you can opine to this. When you do a LIHTC deal, you have anywhere from 5 to 15 different partners from the banks, from a construction lender or permanent lender, your tax credit syndicator, both on the federal and state side. If you're getting tax increment financing dollars from the local municipality, home funds, your general contractor, your architect, and you all have to work together. You all have to be rowing in the same direction to reach a goal. And that goal is to providing affordable housing to the less fortunate members of our communities. Our country needs to get on that same page where we listen to each other, where we are willing to look at another person's perspective and try and understand where they're coming from. Now, when Matt was giving his presentation, I got a lot of heartburn and anxiety thinking we're at this perfect storm, as Paul said. And yes, we are at a wait and see mode, like Keon said, but my life's mission for the next 20 years, as long as my body and brain hold out, is to build as many low income affordable housing projects as I can. And you can't do that if we're unwilling to talk to one another. If we're unwilling to say, well, this person is affiliated with this political party or they voted for this person, we need to back away from the ledge of this vitriol that's out there. And affordable housing is the perfect medium for that to happen. These deals do not work unless we work together and cooperate. And I think our society and our politicians need to learn something from how these deals work.
thank you, Bill. I think that's a really important point. I would love to just hear what Keon, Paul, and Matt have and what your reaction to what Bill just said might be, and just thinking about how important it is, even though we're in this sort of wait and see mode, to see how all of these policy shifts pan out, but also knowing that affordable housing is really at this moment where we can't wait and see. We have to continue to move forward because we are in such a housing crisis. So how do we reconcile those two things where we don't know exactly where things are headed, but also we have to keep moving forward?
Part of, I'll take the first bite of that. Uh, there has been some recent polling. I mean, it may be about a year dated, but the Bipartisan Policy Committee put out a poll focusing on housing and where they stand now. And there was a lot of bipartisan support. It didn't matter whether you were registered as a Republican or a Democrat. By and large, identified housing as a huge need in our country right now, and that the federal government has a role, as do state and local governments, in making sure housing is affordable to all. Like by majorities, and regardless of party, we're saying this. So this is also a moment, and it kind of ties with Bill's comments too. Like this is a great space for unity and to bring people together because there is so much consensus that we need this kind of that our housing costs are getting way out of hand, and we need to be able to build more housing, make housing more affordable. And by doing so, you're also going to create jobs and improve economic outcomes because now people have more money available to buy goods and services. So it's such a winning solution and shared by a lot of people. I don't know how you get to the next step. Maybe we did see some of it. Maybe when you saw a Republican-only bill that expanded the credit for the first time in like 20 years, maybe it is. We are getting through the din a little bit with some of this housing work. So we just have to keep pushing it.
Yeah, I would say, I echo that. We do have to continue pushing it. One of the factors that may be somewhat of a saving grace is that, the federal government does in some ways move slowly. And so a lot of what we're talking about in terms of these changes, those will be things that impact us at the state level more when we hit July 1 next year. So the funding that we're looking to utilize between now and June 30, that funding has been allocated. And so we're making awards. We intend to come out with notices of funding available for both our home funds, our National Housing Trust funds. We just signed our contract with HUD for our COC funds. Those contracts are being actually reviewed today and will be going out to grantees shortly. So I say that to say, HUD kind of works a year behind. So we're receiving what's known as 2025 funds from HUD, and we're using them in 2026. So we at the department are not as worried about 2026 as much as we are looking at what's the impact going to be for 2027, because a lot of these changes will impact what happens in 2027. So I think we can continue to push forward. We can continue to move, but we are seeing some shifts and changes. So one of the questions in the chat was, what is the impact of the state tax credits going away? And I know Bill spoke to that and how it's impacting Utah. I would say it's another, it's chipping away at the stability of what we have in terms of our financing structures. So we talked about how you've got to be able to fill the gap in some way. The state tax credits were another resource that developers were beginning to use to fill gaps and to make sure that certain projects could move forward. And so it's basically taking one more option off the table. We will see impacts as options are removed from the table. I think Pat's comment that it's impacts supportive housing, that's true. The more pieces you move off the table, the harder it is to get supportive housing done. And the same thing is the harder it is to get housing done outside of our metro areas. So one of the unintended consequences that we may see is that deals that are located in metro areas are going to be the ones that are easier to finance and continue to move forward, whereas deals on some of the more fringe areas have a harder time putting their capital stack together and being able to move forward.
Thanks, Keon. Paul, anything to add there, or do you want us to move on?
No, I think it's well said. I think I'll let you move on.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to get to some of the audience questions, and thank you all for asking such thoughtful questions in the chat. I'm keeping track of them, and we'll get to as many of them as we can this morning. One of the questions came a while back from Marcus Ishmael. I was also He says, I am also thinking that the reduction in corporate tax liability included in the One Big Beautiful Bill may also reduce demand for LIHTC. What's your take on this?
Uh, Bill Knowlton here. Again, from what I'm hearing in the marketplace is it's a softening of pricing as of right now. That may go to some of the wait and see attitudes that people are having. However, ultimately, if there's less need for that tax credit from the corporate tax folks who benefit from the LIHTC tax credit, it's there to be a softening of pricing.
Can I just add, the primary investors of tax credits are people with significant passive income, which if you're reading that, it's banks, right? And the banks will always have a significant tax liability, but as we're underwriting the equity pricing, as Bill said, the higher interest rates are and the higher our rate of return hurdle is on the cash, that's what drives the rates down. So the more demand or the more supply that's out there with credits, it obviously would affect the pricing. But I do foresee us always having that same level of demand for buying the credits themselves.
Yeah, I was going to share too. I don't think, I think these answers are spot on. I don't think it's the tax consequences because we saw that in the 2017 Act when the corporate rate went from 35% to 21%. The corporate rate is still at 21%, right? So you didn't see a huge change in liability. And in fact, I think they might have done something with the bonus depreciation, right? Which might have even allowed to have a little more attractive on the margins on the tax consequence side. So I think the other issues are the ones that are a little bit, it's interest rates and just general like bumping up against public, what we're calling the public welfare caps that are going to have more of a of an impact. And obviously the new volume of credits that's out there.
And before we shift away from LIHTC, I want to get to Megan's question about softening of occupancy rates and loss of income for residents in just one moment. But we have a question in the Q&A about what is the smallest and largest number amounts of units possible when taking advantage of LIHTC. So if any of our LIHTC experts want to address that.
I'll give the annoying lawyer answer. It depends. Um, so the sweet spot we're seeing in the 9% realm, both in Arizona and Utah, is around 60 to 70 units per 9% LIHTC round. Again, those are states that have fairly similar pricing in Utah, Nevada, and Arizona. Other states like, metropolises like San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego, those numbers are going to be smaller units per tax credit dollar.
Thanks,
I
Phil.
would I would agree with what Bill said. We're seeing on the 9% side, the average, if we average out deals, they're coming in at about 66 units per deal on the 9% side. On the 4% side, we're seeing much larger deals, but that's more of a function of, I believe, changes at the legislature where some of the caps on volume cap were removed. And so developers were able to do deals that are more 300, we were seeing 400 unit deals where that wasn't the case years ago. But that's what we're seeing now more on the 4% side is these massive deals that are getting done. On the 9% side, it's still been consistent around, as Bill says, 60 to 70 units.
Thank you. Appreciate the insight on LIHTC here. I wanted to, again, like I said, get back to Megan's question about seeing a softening of occupancy rates and loss of income for residents. And I think this is the right panel to ask about whether you can speak to those concerns around projects achieving rents, even in affordable units. Um, Megan adds, when costs to build are so high, but tenants cannot pay current max rates, it feels even more challenging to produce new units. So would love some reaction from each of you on that. And maybe this is a good time to also discuss how we might think about preserving existing affordable housing as well.
I can speak to the softening of the occupancy. So what we are seeing, it's basically what are the area median income rent bands that are being serviced. We have not seen much softening in the 9% rent bands. That's a weighted average of about 44% area median income. Where we're seeing the big struggles right now are in the 60% AMI rent bands. For example, in Salt Lake City, there's been a massive boom of apartment buildings, 60% AMI, 4% light tech deals side by side to market rate units. Today in downtown Salt Lake City, there's about 800 vacant, brand new 60% AMI light tech units. And I can tell you that does not make developers, tax credit syndicators, or banks happy because the developer's paying debt service with developer fee, and banks are wondering, is this deal gonna implode? Um, and so lowering of incomes of folks' ability to pay rent just exacerbates that problem.
Yeah, I would agree with what Bill's saying there. I think as some of the rents or as some of the incomes are dropping, you now need units that are more at the 40 and 30% AMI level. And unfortunately, it's harder to make deals pencil at that level. So then you end up with developers that are fighting to get folks that can come in at the 60% AMI level. I can't speak to exact vacancy rates, but I will say we are starting to see or hear about softening of rents that's taking place. I believe the HUD fair market rents just came out recently. We were talking about it in the office that the rents for 2 bedrooms has actually come down in Maricopa County, and so we are seeing that whether it's an impact of both some of the market rate buildings that are coming in as well as the amount of affordable housing that's coming in. It's all having an impact. It's creating a massive amount of units that all have to be absorbed. I think we're monitoring it closely. What we're seeing an impact of is that renters who are in older tax credit properties are leaving those properties to move into newer LIHTC properties. And so we're seeing a shift where our older LIHTC properties are starting to experience more vacancies as their residents are finding newer properties to move into. And so that's a trend that we're watching, and we'll see how that continues to unfold.
And I'll just add, I was in New Mexico last week at their housing finance conference, and that's a very real reality is trying to develop low-income housing tax credit units today. You're competing at that 60% level with maybe a 2-year-old fully amenitized project and without any restrictions. So yeah, the net effect is exactly what Kian was saying. As lenders look at it, they start driving the vacancy higher when they underwrite it, which ultimately leads to more gap funding needs that you have to get into the project or other form of subsidy like Section 8 vouchers.
I will say one comment to anyone that's participating today in this webinar, regardless of what your role is in the affordable housing arena. This speaks to the absolute necessity to build quality, highly amenitized, nice light tech projects. And I always go back to the advice of my sweet grandfather who passed away not too long ago at 103 years old. He would thump me on the chest and he'd say, "Now, Billy, don't you dare design or build a project that you yourself would not live in." And so that speaks to building literally the highest quality product you can because it remains competitive in the marketplace.
Hey, Serena, can I ask a follow-up question along Megan's line? I'm curious to the folks here, have you guys used income averaging? So this is a provision, I think that it was enacted in 2018, whereas typically each unit had to be affordable to someone making less than 60% of area median income. You can now attract people up to 80%, provided you were balancing it. So for each 80% unit, you'd have to have at least a 40% unit. And the idea was you could cross subsidize, to Megan's point about making it more affordable. Have you guys used that? How's that experience been?
We're
I'll
starting to
speak.
see that.
Oh, go ahead.
We're starting to see that more on the 4% side. I think it took developers, developers all have a business model, right? And they get used to their model. I think it's taken them a little bit of time to adjust over and to start seeing how that plays. But we're seeing more deals come in requesting the income averaging.
Ditto to what Keon just said. Some of us are a little more dense than others, and it takes us a little bit of time to understand how this stuff actually plays out.
Well, it took the IRS a couple of years, I think, to get the regs out where people could understand and follow what they were supposed to do to. So it's not surprising there's been a little bit of a lag.
Okay, I want to shift topics a little bit here because we had a couple of questions come in during the discussion asking how do civic society organizations and organizations like the Valley Interfaith Project best support efforts to get more affordable housing to be built? So, since each of you has your unique perspective, I think this is your opportunity to ask these organizations for what you think would be most helpful to do in collaboration.
I'll speak. I believe it all starts at the dinner table, right? Um, the greatest impact you can have is at your own dinner table with your family, and then in your community, your local churches, synagogues, temples, schools, PTAs, and then with your local elected officials. In my humble opinion, one of the largest impediments to more affordable housing product being produced is NIMBYism, not in my backyard. I have been in chambers with elected officials in Maricopa County who have said to me, point blank, with 12 other witnesses, even though that site is zoned for multifamily housing, I will allow you to build low income because we don't want those people living in that part of town. The biggest impact you can have is helping reshape the zoning laws and the discussion around who really are those people, because they're teachers, they're cops, they're firefighters, they're service workers, they're senior citizens on fixed incomes, they're young families. And so the greatest impact you can have is start talking to your friends, family, neighbors, and elected officials about the need and the actual product and who it's serving. That's just my opinion.
I was going to share something similar. To me, it's about like the advocacy. I focus on federal advocacy, but a lot of the problems, or a lot of solutions, I should say, are really more at the local levels. And it really is getting in front of the city council with good recommendations, whether it's on zoning policy, inclusionary zoning, things like that. Building near transit. Phoenix has done a tremendous job of building affordable housing near transit. But a lot of these all there's state programs that need to be. My understanding, your state housing credit you from this call is expired or will expire. Well, maybe we need to make sure that we can continue that program.
Yeah, I would echo what Matt said there. It's about reaching out to your elected officials and letting them know what you want to see in your communities and letting them know the value of the resources that we have and how important it is to keep those resources moving into these transactions. I think I also agree with Bill. I think one of the most effective ways that we've been able to overcome the not in my backyard is really explaining who qualifies for affordable housing. And many people are surprised to find out who all would qualify to live in affordable housing. And so telling the narrative in a way that broadens the perspective is helpful, and just being able to put out there a more accurate picture of who's looking to move into these apartment units.
I was just going to echo, Keon, what you just said, but I think the message too, we get caught up talking about affordable housing and people shut down. But when you start talking about the community, we need a wide variety of housing to suit everybody's needs, including the workforce, including, different members of society. People open up a little bit more to that conversation. And the low-income housing tax credit is a tool to help build some of that housing. And once you share with them the AMI levels and who you're talking about who could qualify, I found that people open up a little bit more. And every housing unit we build that's even, upper income opens up one other unit for somebody else down the chain or the ladder that they can move into. So I think the message around just a diversity of housing seems to help with that message.
Thank you. And I also wanted to make sure that I highlighted this comment from the chat from Mayor Daggett and Flagstaff. She says that as the mayor, I encourage housing advocates to attend our meetings and advocate for housing. It makes a big difference. So that's helpful to know from an elected official's perspective as well. Um, so speaking of Flagstaff and areas outside of our major rural areas or major metro areas, I want to make sure that we get to some of the topics regarding rural parts of our state because that's come up a couple of times already. And I want to get some insight on what you think these policy shifts mean for the non-metro areas. And one of the things that we had discussed before as a panel is what some of the potential for affordable housing in rural Arizona might be with the new designation of rural opportunity funds in the One Big Beautiful Bill, but feel free to address other rural topics as well, if that's of interest.
I can speak. Um, I'm very active in rural markets as well. Like I said, I just completed a project in rural central Utah. Um, One thing that I was frankly shocked to learn is how much land some of these rural communities own and control. One of the ways that we have been able to leverage some of the opportunities in rural markets, in a joint venture, public-private partnership with these local communities that own land in strategic locations in their towns and areas. That can be putting the land in, at a zero basis, or other ways that are legally permissible. I see that Chuck Lotzar is here today, and he'd be able to is legally permissible from a municipal standpoint. But there's a lot of land out there in these rural communities, and to the extent these groups have interest and have the political willpower to enter those into affordable housing projects, I encourage you to do so because that's very enticing to a developer.
To the 9% tax credits, we actually have a rule set aside in our qualified allocation plan, which basically equates to making sure that about 3 rural projects a year are funded with 9% tax credits. And so that's been a really good driver of making sure that deals are getting done. I think the bigger piece that we're seeing is that rural communities are coming to the table wanting more affordable housing built, and so they're putting in more of their own local resources into some of these deals and working with developers to try to figure out how to partner and get deals done. I do, again, any funding that goes away just takes away an option that you have to fill gap. But I think the positive sign that we've seen is that there's a willingness to really get deals done in some of our rural areas. And so if you look at projects that we funded over the last 3 years, you'll see a trend of more rural housing, and we're seeing also just more applications coming in from rural communities. So it's a lot more competitive in our rural set aside than it's been over the past years.
Thank you. Appreciate the conversation around what we can think about when it comes to rural affordable housing development. In other states, there are third-party guarantee funds for nonprofit developers, and that's not something that we've seen yet in Arizona, at least as far as I'm aware. Uh, how does that help affordable housing? And is that something that we could see in Arizona? And who could help lead an effort like that? And I don't know, Paul, if you've seen that in other states, or Bill, if you've seen that in Utah, but it might be helpful to have some perspective from outside of Arizona with that too.
I have seen organizations working, and a lot of times it's been linked to working with trying to get new developers into the affordable space. So you might have an uprising developer who just doesn't quite have the balance sheet to be able to offer the guarantees. And that has been successful in some models, but I have not seen a lot of banks adopt. I guess I just haven't seen a lot of those projects come forward. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, I wonder, not to I don't want to throw organizations under the bus here, but I wonder if there's a role for some of whether it's foundations or some of the CDFIs to try to pull together some of pools of money that can be used for some of that guarantee. I I don't believe it's something we're going to be able to do at the state level, but I do think maybe there's a role for foundations to pull together some funds or CDFIs to try to pull together some dollars to do that.
Keon, we call that being voluntold. You're not throwing anyone under the bus. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Matt.
It's also a good, just a good commercial for the CDFI fund at the Treasury Department, because the funding they do, they basically make grants to CDFIs that in turn we can use that money very flexibly. A lot of them do use it for guarantees, to set up a guarantee pool or to set up a loan pool at a very discounted rate of funds. Also for to do to first loss position on larger projects. So that kind of flexibility is critical, and guarantees are a big piece of that. And that's why we want to make sure the CDFI fund needs to get funded at high levels, and that the money that has been appropriated is released to the CDFIs that have applied for the funding this year. So I just want to take this opportunity to give a commercial to the CDFI funding.
As a private developer who has partnered with nonprofits and with housing agencies and housing authorities, one of the roles I bring to the table is a balance sheet to guarantee. And so, not necessarily a fund, but it is an option to partner with a developer who does have balance sheet capacity in order to get over that. It's a large hurdle, right? So that's just throwing that out there as my commercial.
And actually, Bill, to that point, that's the majority of the projects I see coming forward. It is the nonprofit partners with a developer that brings those guarantees along, and for that guarantee gets a percentage of the development fee income. But that developer, I will say, a lot of times a nonprofit doesn't like the idea that they're sharing a developer fee with a developer, but that developer brings in so much more than just getting the project done. It's their connections, it's the political connections, it's getting the project from the beginning to the end and getting the tax credit award. So I've seen those be extremely successful partnerships.
And I will say this, I have no problem being self-deprecating. Developers have a poor reputation in most cities for a reason. There are some developers who are bad actors and who have pillaged and plundered communities with the way they've done business. I don't believe I am one of them. There are good developers out there. There are developers who are ethical and honest and who approach capitalism with a conscience. And so I think there needs to be a mind shift in that partnering with a for-profit developer is somehow compromising your altruistic mission for your nonprofit mission. I am very much an advocate for affordable housing, and if my skills and my balance can help you forward your mission to get an affordable housing project off the ground, I'd very much like to do that.
Thank you. Sounds like there are a lot of good opportunities to partner, and I really appreciate the spirit of collaboration that everyone in the audience is mentioning. And I just wanted to, again, share that we're going to be sending out a recording to everyone who registered for this webinar. I saw a question about that a little while back, and we'll also be including links to all of the resources that have been shared. So if there are opportunities to collaborate after this webinar, we always want these webinars to foster discussion that lives beyond just this hour-and-a-half conversation. So if there's a way that we can help you be connected to the panelists or to anyone who has been raising great points in the chat, please go ahead and make sure to follow up with the Partnership for Healthy Communities so we can help you out. There have been a few more questions in the audience. I don't know that we will be able to get to everything today. We have about 15 minutes left, and I wanted to make sure that we've talked a little bit about some deregulation and some of the barriers to development, but I'd like to give our panelists an opportunity to talk about some of those barriers to development a little bit more, because I think that the reality is that building affordable housing is incredibly challenging. So I guess if each of you could wave your magic wand and continue to shift some of the policy landscape or some of the regulatory landscape, what is getting in the way? What do we need to change to get more affordable housing built or preserve existing affordable housing? Thanks, Phil. Go for it.
Yeah, it's a dangerous position to be between me and a microphone, right? Um, I will say this, very well-meaning, smart policy creators will create policies associated with affordable housing that on paper look like a good idea, but in practice are extremely problematic. For example, I have built all of my projects to the Enterprise Green Community Standards, which is a great program for creating water efficiency, energy usage efficiency, better insulation, all of these things for a better, healthy environment for the tenants. Well, that program has now shifted to be enterprise green communities, but then you have to have different elements of your project that address social injustice or address historical prejudice. And my question to the folks in Washington one day was, how do I design an apartment building that accounts for 400 years of injustice in American history? And they said, "Oh, we have people doing it." And I said, "Can you introduce me to them?" And they had no answer. And so I am all for innovation. I'm all for, creating, you know, wonderful, beautiful, safe, environmentally conscious, affordable housing projects. But there needs to be an element of realism associated with some of these policies and procedures. That's number one. Number two is zoning reform. Um, I have met with at least 7 municipalities in the last year who have said we would rather raise taxes by 70% than allow for density. The only way you're going to build enough housing to meet the demand is with more density. And for whatever reason, that's like a swear word to some of these municipalities. So those are my thoughts.
Thanks. Thanks, Bill. I'll mention, I know zoning is a topic that could be its own webinar. And in fact, we've done two on zoning. So I'll be sure to drop links to those conversations from those past webinars in the chat, because I think that clearly we could go on for quite a while on zoning, but I think it's an important topic. So I want to share those resources in the chat. Matt, Keon, Paul, what would you change?
Well, my magic wand would be, again, we've got such a great solution for rental housing for low-income families to cover the gap with development costs to make it affordable for low-income families. Low-income housing tax credit. We need to now do that for single-family homes because, I'm not going to open up my slide presentation. First half dozen slides just shows we are underproducing single-family homes. The ones we are producing are not affordable to the working families that need to have home ownership to build their equity, to be able to pass on to the next generation. I mean, that's the biggest thing in this country right now. So we have this great idea out there, Neighborhood Homes Investment Act. Let's get that enacted. Let's get that across the finish line. We had over 100 co-sponsors in the House last year, Democrats and Republicans. I think we'll be well over 100 by this time next year on that legislation. I think we're close to 60 now. The Senate, we keep picking up co-sponsors too. It's bipartisan, and that'll be the next big fix. You have LIHTC for affordable rental homes. You have new market tax credits and opportunity zones for kind of commercial revitalization. But there's nothing on the single family side to incentivize development when the math isn't quite working out. This is the solution there. Neighborhood Homes Investment Act.
I'm going to kick it all the way back to what Bill said at the very beginning. When you're doing a LIHTC development in particular, you have 15 partners or so, and you all have to be rowing in the same direction. What I found is, and I'll tie it to your last point you said a second ago, put an exclamation point on it. I'm in Colorado. We passed Prop 123. It's a stable funding source for affordable housing rentals. Some very smart people got together and said, well, how are we going to use that? Came up with programs, but their levels of programs don't work with other federal programs and other subsidy programs. And I've seen a lot of that where like-minded good people come together, come up with a program or a structure to help, but that structure doesn't work with other funding sources that are already out there or competes with. So I think to find ways to break the barriers to make layering of subsidies and layering of different resources work together in the same project, I think would be one of the most beneficial things we could do in the short time. But I see that so often that the different levels of funding, developers get excited that they got awarded 2 or 3 different subsidies just to find out that the subsidies don't work together.
For me, if there's one thing I would change, I would say at the state level, having a consistent funding source. We've had our funding levels change significantly year after year. And so it's hard to put in place a consistent program that the community and developers can rely on, because we have to readjust each year based on what's our budget, what's our gap, what's our funding source. If we had a dedicated amount of funds each year that we knew off the top, this is what we're going to have, we could program that, and everyone could also work of that known entity as they're building their performance.
Thank you all for sharing those thoughts. I hope that there are still enough people. There's still a lot of people listening in on this webinar, so I'm hopeful that there are some policymakers who took those suggestions to heart. Since we are getting close to the end of our time together, I wanted to make sure we'll spend the last few minutes giving each of the speakers an opportunity to share any final thoughts that you might have. I feel like we have not talked a lot about opportunity zones and opportunity zones now being permanent. So I wanted to make sure that we spent just a moment talking about that a little bit. Matt had addressed it in his presentation, but I would like each of our panelists to have a chance to talk about what you think the potential for affordable housing is in those opportunity zone census tracts. And Matt, maybe if you want to refresh our memories and give a little level setting on opportunity zones.
Yeah, so and let's do the focus too with affordable housing. So the opportunity zones were enacted in 2017. It was kind of a one-shot deal. So they used the census and a reminder that each state, and this is kind of a neat wrinkle to it, each state selects their zones. So there's a minimum qualification of the census tracts, but then it's up to the states to figure out which of their portions of their state they want to designate as opportunity zones. And I think they can't pick more than 25% of their eligible communities. So that's really an innovative wrinkle, and that's something that is going to be the first step in this new opportunity zones. The state's going to have to will be submitting a new set of zones, and they're going to have to do, I'm sure, some kind of public comment making to collect that information. So it's a great opportunity to weigh in and say which areas of the state or your markets, your cities that you think ought to be identified as these zones. But once they are set up, then investors can get tax benefits for investing in what are called opportunity funds. These are funds that are set up to serve specifically investments in that zones. They get two kind of incentives. The first is that if they exit from they have a capital gains event. So you own $1 million, you cash out of Amazon stocks and you made $1 million. Normally you'd owe tax right away on that $1 million gain. They're saying if you put that $1 million gain into an opportunity fund, you can defer paying taxes for up to 5 years, and you can also get a reduction in the taxes owed by 10%. So now instead of owing a tax on $1 million, you owe the tax only $900. So you save a money up front. But the big benefit is if you keep the money in an opportunity fund for 10 years, you keep that $1 million in there for 10 years, and then you exit the fund and say you've made now $2 million, you don't owe anything on those gains. So that's the big incentive to an opportunity fund. And that's also why you don't see a lot of affordable housing investments, because you don't get big upsides, or you don't see, like, since a lot of stuff LISC invests in is like federally qualified health centers or charter schools or daycare centers. In addition to affordable housing, you just don't get this big appreciation in assets or an exit possibility that makes a lot of money after the 10 years. So the kind of investors that are investing in opportunity funds they're looking for kind of mid to high double-digit returns on their investments, and that's generally not what you're going to see in our space, in the affordable housing space. So I'm not going to get into them now, but we propose a lot of kind of tweaks to make LIHTC investments more profitable in opportunity zones that were not picked up. We're going to keep pushing these kind of ideas now. The program is permanent, but that's kind of like how I see the landscape have played out. I don't know if it's going to create, no pun intended, for affordable housing without some more tweaks to the program.
I'll say on the opportunity zone front, there's definitely a lot more developers that are trying to figure out how to utilize that in a way that can benefit affordable housing. At our Arizona Housing Forum earlier this year, we had a session, a public comment session for our qualified allocation plan. And one of the things that there was a consistent support for from the community is that developers want to see opportunity zones added to our scoring category. We give out points QCTs, the qualified census tracts, the difficult to develop areas, and the community revitalization plans. And so we will be making that change in our QAP so that there is an incentive to continue to explore how opportunity zones could be utilized. But at this point, I know developers are trying to figure out how to utilize that benefit.
I'll just echo everything that Keon said. I am ready, willing, and able to try and capitalize on this opportunity, and I think it's something that could greatly impact an inflow of capital to these programs. But I'm frankly going to have to get Matt on retainer to educate me on the best way to to move this forward.
I have nothing more to add. Matt hit it spot on. I think the incentives to do affordable housing opportunity zones just right now don't economically align.
Thank you all. Appreciate each of your unique perspectives and insight on that topic and everything else regarding affordable housing financing. I am going to give each of our panelists 1 minute to share their final thoughts. But before we end the webinar for today, I wanted to thank the audience for being here, for being so engaged and sharing your thoughts and questions in the chat. I know we didn't get to everything because it's even with 90 minutes, it's impossible to cover everything. But I wanted to thank everyone for sharing your insight and for the audience for being so engaged. We'll be sending out that recording to everyone who registered for the webinar. We'll be sharing links to the resources that were shared in the chat. And I just wanted to thank each of our panelists for sharing their insight and their wisdom and for being here today. So on behalf of the Arizona Partnership for Healthy Communities and LISC Phoenix, we really appreciate the audience and the panelists. So final thoughts, panelists. Matt, I'm going to start with you because you're off mute already.
Yeah, I would just say, it's, we'll do our best here. Those of us in DC working on public policy, government relations in this space are going to do our best to do whatever we can to keep the message where the funding is working, where we need more of it, where we need better regulatory regimes in place. But for me, it's almost like a thank you for you guys that are doing the real work out there and building these units. And when I can share your stories of success, that's what makes me more successful as a lobbyist. So I just want to thank you all for your work and thank Terry in particular. All of our executive directors are really the engines that keep LISC coming. And I appreciate all the work that she's doing. Getting to see that I visited Phoenix 2 or 3 times since I've been at LISC, and I just love seeing the work you guys are doing out there. So thank you and keep it up.
Thanks, Matt. Come to Arizona anytime and appreciate your good work in DC. Paul, why don't I turn it over to you for final thoughts?
I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and it's a great conversation. I'll just say that I feel like sometimes with affordable housing, everybody feels so overwhelmed that there's all these barriers to get out there. But I will say it's one of the most dynamic industries, and I've really enjoyed working in it for the last 15 years, because as these problems come about, people find solutions, and it's just getting the right people together to have the right conversations, and it's amazing what can be done. So continue to do all the work we're doing and continue to try to push everybody that you know that we need to get more housing solutions.
Thank you. Keon, final thoughts.
I'll say maybe the one bright spot from the affordable housing crisis that we're experiencing is that it's driven more people to the table to discuss the topic than maybe we've seen in a long time or ever, I'd say. And then we're seeing jurisdictions and places that maybe affordable housing just wasn't considered to be an issue that are now at the table trying to figure out how to resolve this. And so I'd say let's keep those conversations going. Let's continue to collaborate and let's see what we can build with this momentum that we have going.
Thank you. Yes, let's keep that momentum going. And of course, last but not least, Bill.
I want to thank Terry and Serena and all the good people at LISC and my new friend Matt. and Paul. Thank you so much. And Keon, we've been friends for quite some time, and hopefully we'll be friends for much longer. I will say this to anyone that's participating on this webinar: if I can be a resource or an asset to you in any way, shape, or form, please do not hesitate to call me, email me, or text me. I am all about collaboration, and I believe that these things get done and success happens with friends. I want to be your friend, and I want to help move affordable housing forward in Arizona, but also in other jurisdictions. So thank you so much for this opportunity. I am most grateful.
Thank you all for being here, and thank you again to the audience. We will be sending out the recording to this conversation. Please share it with your friends, your colleagues, your elected officials, and thank you to each of our panelists for sharing your insight and for being here today. Have a great week, everyone. Thank you.